And that would seem to be what the news is around the country this morning. And can I just share with you? I think that this is the most, at the moment, the most sleep deprived nation on the planet. I walked out of here last night around 11 o'clock, maybe just a little after 11 o'clock. We had decisions on most of our local and state races, and things were going up in the air still nationally. Donald Trump had been standing, according to Fox News, about 15 to 16 votes shy of wrapping this thing up in the Electoral College for a couple of hours, and I went home. By the time I actually made it to the house, I stopped in a store on the way that was still open because I was keyed up. And the closer I got to home, the more wide awake I felt. I got home and I just could not get to sleep. And I sat down and I opened up my Facebook account while I was watching television to see if there was any new developments. About 1:41 this morning Eastern Time, that would have been 11:41 our time, The Hill and the Associated Press suddenly declared Pennsylvania going for Trump, and that would put him over the top, according to the numbers that had been compiled over at Fox and Fox News Network. And then the New York Times gradually got on board with that. But the television networks at that point were all a little nervous about saying it's Donald Trump's election, that he is now the president-elect. So I was sitting there and I was typing on Facebook, making some comments about all of this. And what amazed me was how quickly I was getting responses from people, but not just here in the Mountain West or even the Pacific Coast, but who were still awake on the East Coast. And finally, when I went to bed, it must have been 3 or 3:30 on the East Coast, and people were still chattering about this. There may be a lot of people who just simply haven't gone to bed since last night. It was truly an awe-inspiring event. And then when John Podesta came out and spoke for Hillary Clinton, I thought she was passed out or was having a coughing fit. Really what was going on is that the Clinton Asties were sitting around their hotel room and they were trying to plot what their next move was, because it's never over for those people. And with that crime cabal that they have put together, I'm sure they're looking for ways. She's scheduled to give what is called a concession speech in a short while. My guess is that they have been just trying to push back the clock as long as they can in hopes that they will find some legal means of trying to upset the apple cart in the will of 50 states across the country. Now, when I went to bed, I only slept for a couple of hours, but when I went to bed, Trump had a lead in the popular vote. It has simply switched back now to Clinton, but it is still very close. Could go either way. If you're looking at some of the electoral maps today, and if you break down beyond the states, and you look at, they show red for county by county across the country on some of these. Some of the maps are just amazing. Over at the New York Times, they've been compiling a whole series of these maps. Knowing how many liberals work there, they must have arthritis already from pounding the keyboards in anger as they have to write all of this. One of the maps shows counties where Donald Trump actually had more votes than Mitt Romney had in 2012, and they do this by showing you a little red arrow on the map. There are red arrows all over the United States, and some of these are concentrated in areas that should have been the Clinton stronghold, and that is around the Great Lakes, where Trump ended up taking, well, he took Pennsylvania, he took Ohio, looks like he has Wisconsin and Michigan in the bag, and even Minnesota, which has been very much it will go back and forth, but it's overwhelmingly still a liberal state. That was the birthplace of the what they used to call the Farmer Labor Party, the socialist movement in the United States. Really got started the windswept prairies in western Minnesota. Oh gosh, close to 100 years ago. I saw a movie called Prairie Fire about that all the way back when I was a college student. So I know a little bit of the history there. But the county by county breakdown. Give you an example. Hillary Clinton won Nevada. When you actually see what the county by county map looks like, you see she's represented in blue. You see a little tiny corner in the very southeastern corner of Nevada, and it's blue. That's Las Vegas. Everything else in the state is red. In Nebraska, in the eastern side of Nebraska, you see just this little speck of blue. That's Omaha. Everything else in Nebraska is red. You come to Idaho, you see just a few specks of blue. Coeur d'Alene, Moscow, and then maybe Sun Valley. Everything else is red. And that's the look of the map from coast to coast. In Los Angeles, the big population centers of the West Coast, LA, Portland, San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, it's all blue. But even those states are red everywhere else. On the East Coast, New York City, Boston, Baltimore, Washington, all blue. But my home state of New York, once you get outside that little tail at the very bottom of the map, which is New York City and Long Island, once you get into the upstate New York region, it's other than Buffalo, which was light blue, but that's an old Union town, and they likely bought into Hillary's malarkey that the Republicans are the party of the mean and I'm the party of the sweet, even though she took all of that Wall Street money. You start to understand people out there were angry. And there's a couple of other factors in media. I switched over for a few minutes just out of sheer joy to watch the crying fest over at MSDNC last night. Rachel Maddow and Marvin the Martian, what's his name? Eugene Robinson were sitting there, and they were nearly in tears talking about that big, mean, rotten Mr. Trump. But they don't get it. And I was thinking, media was so unfair to Trump, especially in the final weeks of the election, that even a lot of people who hadn't been Donald Trump fans, maybe hadn't even intended to vote for president this year, they watched the way the media was getting behind her and trying to pull her across the finish line. That's the phrase I've been using on the program, pull her across the finish line. Americans still have a very strong sense of fair play, and they saw that, and they didn't like it. And I think a lot of people said, I'm going to show them. They cannot tell us who's going to be our president. The media can't dictate who's going to run this country. And they went out and they voted for Trump in droves. People just decided they'd had enough. Or after the latest finagling from the FBI over the weekend, and then the liberals were all sitting around and smugly sitting there on the TV shows and saying, oh, yeah, hey, well, our girl, she's got it in the bag. And all of you bigoted white people out there living in West Virginia and all the way out into the Mountain West, we're going to show you, and we're going to force you to participate in same-sex weddings, whether you like it or not, including in the bedroom. And then we're going to come into the bathrooms, and we're going to fondle your little girls, and you're going to like it. I think the American people looked at that and said, no, absolutely not. And they turned out last night, and they made their voices just heard, and not heard. It's a deafening roar that is taking place across this country. It won't be, and I made this reference in my pre-show video on Facebook today. The feeling of euphoria that a great many of us have today, it certainly won't be lasting. Nothing ever is like that. It's akin to when you were sled riding as a kid. And I can remember we would go to a place called Willowbank Park. They had a great sled riding hill there, and then a big flat plain. And if you were good enough, when you could figure out a way to stop your sled as you got older, there was a stream that ran through the park, and you would figure out a way to just fall off the sled or get it stopped before you actually went into the stream as you went across that flat plain. But we would come down the hill, and then you'd have to climb back up the hill, and the snow often was knee deep, if not higher. And it's not easy carrying a sled behind you. In my case, it was my red Saucer fiberglass, which was really fast, but it had no steering control. You trudge up that hill. It takes a long time, and it's a lot of hard work, and you're breaking out in a sweat, and you've got all of those heavy winter clothes on, and you're sweating underneath those clothes. And you get up to the top of the hill, and you put your saucer down, and you sit on it, and you give yourself a little push off, and then you go careening down that hillside, and you're at the bottom in a split second. It only lasts a split second, but it's sheer joy going down that hill with the wind in your face and your hair blowing, and that sense that you don't know where you're going, but you have this great, what's the word I'm looking for? Adrenaline rush. Words, I guess I'm looking for. Adrenaline rush as you're coming down that hill, and then you come to a stop. Then you've got to turn around, and you've got to spend the next several minutes trudging back up the hill so you can have another split second of joy. Today, at the moment, is that split second of joy coming down the hill. Everything that had happened over the last 18 months was trudging up the hill. By next week, we're going to be trudging back up the hill again. But for a few days, if nothing else, because nothing seems to have worked in this country over the last 20 years, if nothing else for the next few days, we're going to have that sense of sheer joy that you had when you were a kid. Unless, of course, you're a liberal. They're up high on top of a hill, too. They're looking at the cliff, and they're ready to jump off today. If you're humane, you'll try to talk them down. On the other hand, if you don't want them around in 2020, you just might ignore them. We have a caller with us. You're on KLIX with Bill Colley on Top Story at 817. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. So normally I don't watch the national news because of their bias, but I did switch over last night and watched NBC. And the part that amazed me, like I say, I don't watch it that often, was that they talked about everything but the issues. They talked about gender. She lost because they revolt against a woman. They talked about it was divided because of the black and white. They talked about it was the class warfare. They talked about everything but the issues that were important. And that's the part that really struck me is they didn't have any point on that. It was all about another reason. So
How
I appreciate that.
they can divide America just like she tried to do.
I agree.
Hey,
Thanks
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you much for the call. And Barack Obama has done it for 8 years. There's a columnist, a newspaper columnist named Jamil Bowie. Up until a year ago, I'd never heard of the guy, and then all of a sudden he started appearing on all of these Sunday morning shows. You know, the really boring ones, Face the Nation, Meet the Press. Our guest today is Senator Bedfellow, and joining me from here on Meet the Press is the AP's, um, blah, 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 and from the syndicated Knight Ridder Group, Jamil Bowie, and then from NPR. Blah, 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 blah. And now we are going to ask polite questions in a politically correct way of our guest for the next hour. Thank you for joining us. No wonder nobody watches those programs. So this Jamil Bowie showed up out of nowhere. First of all, what kind of a name is Jamil? Your job prospects would be, and I'm not trying to be bigoted, but somebody ought to tell these parents, if you name your kid Daquan, Tanisha, or Jamil, you've already harmed their job prospects. Research shows that. People see resumes and they see names like that across the top, and they're already fearing they're going to be hiring a gangbanger. If you named your kid Jim, Tom, or Joyce, they'd have a much better opportunity. But I see this young guy who suddenly came out of nowhere and has a newspaper column, and sometimes I think somebody was sitting around one of these big syndication groups and they said, we don't have enough young black men writing columns for us. We need diversity. They don't need diversity of political opinion. They just need, well, I've got somebody over there who's pink. I've got a guy who's green. We've got a guy over there who's yellow. Oh my gosh, is he ever yellow? He's really a liberal. Oh, gee, there's a young black man walking down the street. Hire him. And this guy was saying it. He said, I never knew how much my country was bigoted and racist. She was a white woman. She was an old white woman. She lost. You got it? But they'll find any excuse they can and claim you're bad, they're good, and the bad people have somehow taken over the country. Gee, I feel the same way about them. We've got more on this subject and more of your telephone calls in just a moment on KLIX. This is obviously a happy day for many of us, and even happier for me because we have some new friends of Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. They've actually been with the radio station in various capacities as a sponsor for many, many years, but I'm referring to Waddell and Reed. Now, each of us, we all know that we're individuals, and we don't like to be put in a cookie cutter, and I think that when you're looking for someone to help you plan for those days when you no longer will be working, one size does not fit all. These are the people to go see at Waddell and Reed. They've been doing this, gosh, for nearly 80 years. It'll be 80 years in just a few months. They're one of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds. In fact, they do two different mutual fund families. They're not rash with your money. They invest very cautiously. And you can say if they've been doing this for 8 decades, they know what they're doing. Waddell and Reed would like to take a planning approach, and they'll try to look up every piece of the puzzle for you as a client. And they also will not try to feed you a bunch of pie in the sky. They'll give you very, what you might call, how shall we put it? They're going to talk to you and tell you you've got to be patient, you've got to be cautious, and don't expect the moon, sun, and stars all at once. And they'll build this plan to meet your goals, your individual goals, and help you manage money. They take planning personally. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. It's 824. It is a day like no other in American history. Probably not since Andrew Jackson was elected in 1828, but they didn't have talk radio in the morning taking your phone calls. Some of you may remember that. Well, Hillary Clinton does. She's going to be giving her speech shortly. I'm calling on President Obama to bring out the military and crush this revolt and allow me to take my proper place in government, which I have waited to do for many, many years while I had to sit here and support that laggard I married. 736-0300. 736-0300. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
That was very humorous, but yeah, I'm sure that's what they would like to resort to. But you have to realize that it's the working class people that really pulled Trump over the hill. When you look at the demographics and so forth, the people that's incomes have stagnated, actually gone down for years. But what incredible odds he had to come over. I mean, the fact that all the mainstream meetings against him, the Republican establishment was against him, the voter fraud that was likely to happen, and probably did in places like Philadelphia. It was just incredible, and all the lies and innuendos that just kept on going and going and going. But I thought about Ben Franklin today after the Constitutional Convention. There was a sun on the back of a chair, I guess, and they said, was this a rising sun or a setting sun? I think this morning we have a rising sun on this country once again. But we have to hold his feet to the fire, and our elected people have got to, follow in line to do that.
I certainly hope so, and I thank you much for the telephone call. There is elation this morning, but it's also an elation that is tempered by a great many grim realities that this country faces at this moment in time. We have another caller with us. Call at 826. You're up next. You're on KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.
Yes, I have a lot of Hispanic friends, and they're good people, and they want what we want. But then there's the ones that want freebies. And in 2008, I know for a fact that there was extremely low Hispanic turnout in my precinct. 2012, there was hardly any, maybe 2 or 3. 2012, there were 80. Now, last night, I haven't got the count yet, but these are, people that I know that work there. That's how it is. And so the point is when you have people going in to perpetuate the welfare, the freebies, and then you've got people that voted for Trump who work hard and want justice. We just wanted some justice and a fair shake. And I think that last night they talk about all the disenfranchised voters of Hillary. Well, we've been disenfranchised for 8 years, and it showed last night. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, thank you. The people were so interested in voting. I think Benito gave me a figure this morning. He said that in Jerome County, 3,000 more people showed up to vote than were registered going into Election Day. I guess you're doing same-day registration. So they had all of these additional people show up. And they weren't illegal aliens voting for a free lunch, which you might think, because the results show strong Republican vote in just about everywhere, especially in Idaho. In fact, the Republicans have picked up apparently a couple of seats in the Lewiston area from the Democrats. I just had a quick note from Christy Zitto. She and Megan Blanksma cleaned house last night running in their district, which encompasses part of Twin Falls County. The Democrats who claimed that they had such they were going to grab a couple of seats here in the 24th district in Twin Falls, failed to do that. The Republicans, even many of the Republicans, weren't backing Heather Scott in northern Idaho. She got 73% of the vote, for crying out loud. Do not these establishment types and these elitists understand what's going on in this country? The message has been sent. The other thing is, the big money you all rely on, it didn't help Jeb Bush. It didn't help Hillary Clinton. The message still counts with the voting public. Trip Family Medicine and Better Health on the way this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. I do know, speaking of Republicans who vanquished liberals last night, Jack Johnson is a county commissioner-elect in Twin Falls County. He's scheduled to join us just after 9 o'clock news this morning. He'll spend a few minutes with us. He got some sleep last night, I hope. That's on the way. Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 8:30, and it's 36.